late 19th century, a city in many ways unrecognisable from the Paris of today. These photos were taken before Haussmann's renovation took place. Thanks to photographers such as Charles Maleville, we're able to take a glance at the old Paris.
They knocked down 20,000 buildings and put up 30,000 new ones. They built 300 kilometres of new roads and also 600 kilometres of sewers. It was such a prodigious project. They just worked with pickaxes and shovels. They had nothing, absolutely nothing.
Hello everybody and welcome back for another episode. Today we're going to be talking about the renovation of Paris ? Now this layout of Paris and a lot of the structures that you see today, or that we see today, was actually the product of a vast public works program commissioned by Emperor Napoleon III between 1853 and 1870. Now we're going to just take a look. I'm just questioning this entire endeavor, and we're going to look at all of the things that were accomplished in this relatively short period of time. But let's talk about some of the key players here. So we've got Napoleon III, who was the nephew of Napoleon I. And this Napoleon, he was the first official president of France from 1848 to 1852. But then when he realized that he couldn't be constitutionally reelected, he seized power by force in 1851, and that led to him establishing the Second Empire. So he was also considered the last French monarch from 1852 to 1870. And in 1870, he suffers a defeat. Him and his army, they suffer a defeat during this Franco-Prussian War in 1870, and he's captured, and that's the end of the Second Empire. But during this period of time, during this Second Empire, which is roughly 18 years, he starts this vast public works program, which lasts 17 years, and he hires or puts this administrator in charge, this Baron Haussmann. That was his kind of one of his titles. But he charged this person with modernizing Paris, to bring clean water and modern sewers, as well as all the a lot of lights, gas lighting, construction of central market, parks, schools, hospitals, asylums, prisons, administrative buildings, apartment buildings, as well as all these avenues and their layout, which is quite an impressive feat considering the technology involved. But this article is just mentioning the most ambitious aspect of Haussmann's plan was to literally reshape the city. Agreed. And basically Paris is laid out in this very interesting pattern, but according to the narrative, prior to 1860, it was composed of 12 of these administrative districts, and then I think they annexed more land according to the narrative, so it doubled in size, and now I believe there's about 20 of these administrative districts. Okay, so this project, it starts in 1853, and it involves this project. It was executed in 3 phases over 17 years. And it involved the demolition of almost, as mentioned in the intro, almost 20,000 structures and the construction of upwards of 30,000 new structures. And again, we're talking people with pickaxes, shovels, sticks of dynamite, horse and buggy. And they started in 1853, and by 1855, they're showing this particular avenue here. It was the first boulevard built by Haussmann, and it served as the model for others. So like all of this progress in 2 years, and that's not even including like the planning phase, right? They would have had to have been all kinds of plans and before this even transpired. So this got me intrigued. Just that doesn't seem realistic. And as mentioned, these boulevards, these really wide boulevards that are almost 100 feet, and a lot of these apartment buildings that are usually about 5 to 7 stories, but these and they have wrought iron balconies, a lot of glass, and they're not just plaster on top of brick. Before Haussmann, most buildings in Paris were made of brick or wood and covered with plaster, but he required that the buildings along these new boulevards be either built or faced with cut stone. So that's a step up from just plaster. And in addition to all of the apartment buildings that they built, they also built 2 new train stations, a new church, several new churches, a central fresh food market, and probably most impressive to me is what they did with their sewer systems. They completely renovated it, and they needed to get more water coming into the city. So they had to build new aqueducts, reservoirs, pumping stations, and in addition to all of that, they also expanded the sewer system by adding over 1,000 kilometers of new sewers. 1,000 kilometers. Now, I've heard numbers also mentioned that say 600 kilometers, so somewhere between 600 to 1,000 kilometers of new sewers. And these sewers, you could stand up in these sewers. And again, we're talking about people with pickaxes, shovels, horse and buggy, dynamite. It just seems really ambitious. It seems really ambitious. And also 2,000 kilometers of underground water pipes threaded throughout Paris's sewers are mirrored above ground by 470 kilometers of aqueducts. So these underground water pipes, as you can see here at the top, now 2,000 kilometers of those, just for some reference, like Paris to Budapest is about 1,200 kilometers. So just in water pipes, you're covering that, basically that distance plus some. And let's see, what did they say? 600 to 1,000 kilometers of just sewers in and of themselves. So like at least halfway if you're going with 600 kilometers to Budapest. And that's just in sewers. And they did all that in 17 years. It's just wow. But and again, you know, all of the processes you would need to pull that off, all of the competencies you have to develop, and all that takes time, and there's things you can't even account for, right? So apparently an accurate topographical map was commissioned for the first time during this period, but this article was just saying, like, no one knew, for example, how to measure underground water sources, or how to cut a trench through sandy soil that would be large enough for the diameter of sewer pipes necessary to drain a city. So there's just all of these problems. There would be all this trial and error, and to just pull that all off in this period of time just seems pretty unbelievable. But there's actually a museum in the Paris sewers, and it's it's still accessible even to this day. Now, when you start looking into old Paris, the medieval Paris that they were trying to renovate, you can actually find lots of photos, and upwards of like 300 to 400 photos of what we're told is old Paris. And here's just 4 of them. And all of these photos are coming from one individual, Charles Marville, and he was primarily the sole photographer for this Baron Haussmann during this renovation. So all these photos are attributed to him. But so there's plenty of actual photos of what we're told the before of Paris is, but when you start looking at the actual reconstruction phase, which again is supposed to be 17 years, the whole city is supposed to be a giant construction site, you start running into drawings and engravings and basically sketches. And here's just another one, and here's a third one. And again, they're ripping up all the roads, they're widening all these roads, creating these boulevards, in addition to the demolition of 20,000 structures, the reconstruction, the building of 30,000 structures with pickaxes, shovels, dynamite, horse and buggy. So when I start seeing this, some red flags are raised. But eventually you finally do come across a few photos that they tell us are the construction. And I'm just going to show you 3 here. And this one's we're told the construction of an avenue here. And, we see some people posing, and it almost looks like a war zone. So what we're told here is that these structures you're seeing in the background, a lot of them are being demolished for this renovation that's happening. But if this is indeed a legitimate photo that we're viewing here, is this a destroyed city? Is it being misrepresented to us? And again, that's just an open question. I don't know. Here's another photo building of this avenue here, and you've got what looks like a destroyed city. But again, we're told this is a demolition of these old buildings and a renovation and a creation of new structures. So, I don't know. It's an interesting question. Here's just another one. We have bricks, rubble, debris everywhere, and we're told this is all for the renovation. So I'm kind of wondering, are we looking at a destruction of Paris, actually, an event that destroyed it, and they're renovating that, as opposed to just an intentional destruction? And could these photos be older than we're being told? But there's a lot of good before and afters, actually. There's a little river island in the River Seine that's part of Paris. And there's some good before and afters that makes me think some work was done. This on this particular island, I think here in the background, I believe this is the Notre Dame Cathedral of Paris is on this little river island, and I think this is that cathedral. And so just pay attention to this, and there's this structure, this dome over here. So it looks like you kind of have a construction site here, and this is going to be the future site of the Prefecture de Police. So here's a before. So this would be from the 1860s, and here's an after, and here's that Prefecture de Police, built in 1863. So here's the Notre Dame Cathedral, I believe, or part of it. Here's that dome. So here's, again, this area right in front becomes this structure here. So it looks like I don't actually see anyone. I see some materials laid out, but this is kind of about as good as it gets. But there's some interesting before and afters as well. We're told this top left photo here is old Paris, and they're saying the building towards the left with the rounded windows still exists today. And so you got this structure here, and on the right you see this, there's, it looks like the same building. And in the back here down this one street, you have this theater, which is, it looks like, it's still there to this day. So, I mean, it looks compelling enough, but the actual evidence of them doing things seems to be absent. So it's just this really interesting dynamic. And here's another particular road or avenue or street, and this structure is still here at the bottom. This is a more current photo, obviously, and it's still there today. And I mean, it looks like this could be manipulated, but even if it wasn't, I'm not really questioning the fact that there were, Paris was in a state of ruin and it got renovated. It's just, when did it happen, and was it actually like a destruction of the city that they're renovating as opposed to an intentional sort of upgrade? But yeah, so those are just some open questions. But so this period of time that they're going through this massive, one of the biggest projects in recent history of the renovation of a city, they decide to have a universal exposition in 1855. So they start this renovation in 1853. And yeah, just like a couple years into that, let's just have a universal exposition visited by over 5 million people. And I think the population of Paris at this time is like 1.6 million people. So as if they don't have enough on their plates, they have this universal exposition. But it gets better. They decide to have another one in 1867. This one visited by 15 million people now. The first exposition, I don't know how many buildings actually were erected as to go along with that, but this particular exposition, 100 structures were constructed or built, we're told, to go along with this universal exposition. So on top of the complete renovation of the city of Paris, above and below ground, you're going to have two universal expositions at this time. So it's just it's just sort of getting harder and harder to sort of believe that they're doing all this at the same time. So that's interesting, that whole dynamic. So so it's from 1853 to 1870 is this renovation. And then what happens in 1870, end of 1870, early 1871, there's Napoleon III gets in a war, the Franco-Prussian War, and he's captured and his army is defeated, and the Prussians basically siege. There's a siege on Paris, and Paris is bombarded by artillery, and there's a lot of destruction. And then after that, the Prussians leave. There's this provisional government that sort of took over, trying to defend the city, because the rest of the army was in, I think they were in Versailles or something like that. And so, but then they didn't want to relinquish power. So there was a conflict, and while they were eventually removed, this provisional government, they decided to burn everything. So you got all this, you got a siege, and you got this rogue provisional government burning everything, right after all of this renovation. It's just this weird dynamic. And here's just some photos. This is I'm going to show like maybe 6, 7, or 8 images here, and it's just a combination of some of the damage done by the commune. It was called the Paris Commune, this provisional government that decided to burn everything on their way out, and also the bombardment. So here's just some of the damage that was done, we're told. And yeah, the city, it looks like a lot of the cities we see burnt by fire in the United States and in Canada. But yeah, just the damage. So what I just kind of have these 4 images here. On the left is photos from we're told, the demolition of the intentional demolition. And on the right, these are the images we're told are for the bombardment, the siege of Paris. So especially the top left and the top right image, they look, eerily similar. Like if you could have told me the one on the right was from the demolition and the one on the left was from the bombardment. Like there's I'm just wondering if all this is one event, is where I'm going with this. Are we looking at one event that destroyed the city and they just kind of rebuilt it? And in addition to that, I was thinking about Charleston, the Great Fire of 1861, all the damage done, and then you had the siege of Charleston during the Civil War, right? And all the damage done with that. So you start looking at this same pattern. You've got on the left-hand side, you had the renovation of Paris in the 1853 to 1870, followed by a destruction event, the siege of Paris, the bombardment of it. And on the right, you have this Great Fire of Charleston, followed by a siege. And it really looks like the same damage in both places. And I'm just wondering if this is sort of a script, like, was there really one event? I think that's the speculation with Charleston. We're looking at one disastrous event, and I'm wondering if that's the same thing we're seeing with Paris. But it's sort of divided into a renovation and a siege, as opposed to just one destructive event. I don't know. What do you guys think? I'd be curious to hear your thoughts. It just seems a lot like the whole renovation in 17 years, and there was more renovation that happened, by the way, after obviously 1870. But what they said they did, just 30,000 structures, 20,000 structures demolished. Again, people with dynamite and pickaxes and shovels and able to pull and then to build 30,000 structures. And these apartment buildings are beautiful. Like, they're really nice and cut stone, and we're talking about the sewer systems and the universal expositions and like the churches and the central markets and the schools and I can't even, all the municipal buildings and the operas. Like, it's pretty mind-boggling. So I don't know. This is sort of an introductory video on all this, and I just wanted to present it to you guys, and I think I'll leave it here. But until next time, take care. Bye.
They knocked down 20,000 buildings and put up 30,000 new ones. They built 300 kilometres of new roads and also 600 kilometres of sewers. It was such a prodigious project. They just worked with pickaxes and shovels. They had nothing, absolutely nothing.